You finally sat down. No tasks. No obligations. Nothing urgent pulling at you. And instead of feeling relief, you felt wrong, like you were forgetting something. Like this stillness was a mistake. You picked up your phone not because you wanted to, but because doing nothing felt unbearable. Here's what's strange about that. You weren't lazy. You were exhausted. You needed the rest. And yet, something inside you treated it like a crime. Why does the brain do that? Why does the moment you finally stop feel like the moment you've done something wrong? That's what this video is about. And the answer goes deeper than you might expect. Think about the last time you had a free afternoon. Maybe it was a weekend. Maybe you finished everything on your list. There was genuinely nothing you had to do. And for a few minutes, it felt okay. Then it started. A low hum of unease somewhere in your chest. A thought, I should be doing something. Then another, other people are being productive right now. Then the worst one, what is wrong with me? You didn't rest. You performed rest while quietly panicking. Maybe you scrolled. Maybe you started a project you didn't need to start. Maybe you cleaned the kitchen, not because it needed cleaning, but because doing something felt safer than doing nothing. And afterward, you were more tired than before. Not physically, something deeper. This is not a productivity problem. It's not about time management. It's not even really about laziness or ambition. This is about identity. Somewhere along the way, and we'll get into exactly when and why, your brain began to attach your sense of worth to your level of output, not consciously, not as a philosophy you chose. It happened quietly, through repetition, through years of being praised when you produced, through environments that rewarded busyness and subtly punished stillness, through a culture that treats rest as something you have to earn, and so your nervous system learned a rule it now enforces automatically, without asking permission. When you are still, you are behind. When you are behind, you are not enough. When you are not enough, you are in danger. That last part sounds extreme, but we'll come back to it, because that's where the psychology gets interesting. The lived experience of rest guilt is specific. It doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like wrongness. Like wearing clothes that don't fit. Like a sound just outside the range of hearing. You can't name it, but it's there. It affects how you talk to yourself. You use words like lazy, pathetic, wasting time for doing something your body biologically requires. It affects your relationships. You feel guilty relaxing near people who are working. Or you secretly resent people who seem comfortable doing nothing. It affects your decisions. You take vacations but bring your laptop. You sleep in and spend the morning recovering from the guilt of sleeping in. You help everyone else because saying yes feels more defensible than saying no. This is not a personality quirk. This is a pattern. And patterns have causes. Before we go further, I want to say something directly. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not someone who just needs to learn to relax. The guilt you feel when you rest is not evidence of a character flaw. It is evidence of a brain that learned to survive. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Guilt, at its core, is a social emotion. Psychologists describe it as the feeling that arises when we believe we violated a value or failed an obligation. Notice that word, believe, not when we have violated something. When we believe we have, your brain is running an old program. A program that was written in a different context, maybe childhood, maybe early work experiences, maybe a family system where love felt conditional on effort. That program made sense then. In environments where approval was tied to performance, learning to stay busy was genuinely protective. It reduced the risk of criticism. It kept you safe. The problem is the environment changed, but the program didn't update. So now in a room where nothing is required of you, your nervous system still fires the old alarm. Do something. Prove yourself. Stay visible. This is not weakness. This is adaptation running in the wrong context. And understanding the difference changes everything. Let's talk about what's actually happening in the brain, because this isn't abstract. There are specific, well-documented mechanisms at work here. And when you understand them, the guilt loses some of its authority. The first mechanism, conditioned value association. Psychologists have long studied how the brain forms associations between behaviors and emotional rewards. When you complete a task, finish something, cross something off a list, your brain releases a small burst of dopamine. Not a flood, a pulse, just enough to feel like progress. Over time, with repetition, the brain doesn't just reward completion. It begins to associate the act of working, the state of being occupied, with safety and approval. This is classical conditioning, applied not to a lab experiment, but to your entire developmental history. If, as a child or a young adult, stillness was followed by criticism, why are you just sitting there? Go do something. Your brain filed that away. Stillness equals potential threat. Activity equals relative safety. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, learned to treat rest as a mild but persistent signal of risk. Not danger like a predator. Danger like social disapproval. Which, for a social animal like a human, registers in a very similar part of the brain. The second mechanism, identity fusion with productivity. There is a concept in psychology called self-concept fusion, the degree to which a particular behavior or role becomes fused with your sense of self. When productivity becomes fused with identity, stopping doesn't just feel unproductive. It feels like disappearing. This is why high achievers often describe feeling like they don't know who they are when they're not working. It's not metaphor. The prefrontal cortex, which manages identity and self-narrative, has literally been trained to construct the self around a doing state. Take away the doing, and the self feels unstable. That instability gets interpreted as guilt. But it's actually closer to identity vertigo. A metaphor. Imagine your sense of self as a spinning top. As long as it's spinning, as long as you're active, producing, moving, it stays upright. The moment it slows down, it wobbles, and your nervous system reads that wobble as danger. So you reach out and give it another spin. Not because you wanted to, because stillness felt like falling. The third mechanism, the default mode network, and rumination here is where it gets quietly fascinating. The brain has a network of regions, called the default mode network, that activates when you're not focused on a task. This network is associated with self-reflection, memory, imagination, and critically, social evaluation. In other words, when you stop doing, your brain defaults to thinking about yourself in relation to others. Am I doing enough? What do people think of me? Am I falling behind? For people with high social sensitivity or history of conditional approval, this default mode activity doesn't feel like peaceful reflection. It feels like accusation. So rest, which should be recovery, becomes a trigger for self-critical rumination. And the brain learns, being still means being confronted with uncomfortable thoughts. So we avoid being still. Not laziness. Avoidance of internal discomfort. A simple mental model. Think of your mind as a snow globe. When you're busy, everything is in motion, shaken, suspended, moving. When you stop, the snow settles. And suddenly you can see what's at the bottom. For some people, what's at the bottom is peaceful. For others, it's thoughts they've been too busy to face. The guilt is often not really about rest. It's about what rest forces you to see. So what do you actually do with this? Not think positive, not just give yourself permission to rest, because you've probably tried that and it didn't work. Real change doesn't come from permission. It comes from rewiring the association. Here is a framework grounded in the mechanisms we just covered. 5 principles, each one tied directly to what's happening in the brain. Principle 1. Name the rule, not the feeling. When rest guilt arrives, most people try to argue with the feeling. I shouldn't feel this way. I deserve rest. I'm being irrational. This rarely works because the feeling isn't coming from the rational brain. It's coming from a much older, faster system. What works better is naming the rule that's generating the feeling. Not, I feel guilty, but there's a rule running that says rest is dangerous. Psychologists call this cognitive diffusion, the process of separating yourself from the automatic thought, observing it rather than living inside it. When you say, I notice a rule that says I must be productive to be safe, you move from being inside the program to watching it run. The amygdala doesn't de-escalate through argument. It de-escalates through recognition. Real-life example. You sit down on a Saturday with no plans. The guilt starts. Instead of arguing back, you say quietly to yourself, there's the rule again. I see it. That's it. That's the whole step. You don't need to fix it. Just name it. Principle 2. Redefine rest as input, not absence. One reason the brain resists rest is that it frames it as nothing, as empty space, as the absence of productivity. But this framing is neurologically inaccurate. During genuine rest, especially unstructured, non-screen downtime, the default mode network is consolidating memory, processing emotional experience, and generating creative connections. Rest is not the absence of work. It is a different kind of work. Neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Young's research is that rest state brain activity is essential for developing a coherent sense of self and processing complex emotional experiences. In other words, your brain cannot fully understand what you've lived through without time to simply be. When you reframe rest as cognitive processing, not laziness, you give the prefrontal cortex a new narrative to work with. And narrative is one of the few things that can modulate the emotional brain. Real-life example. Instead of I'm doing nothing, try I'm processing. When you sit quietly, you're not absent, you're integrating. Say it like you mean it, even if it feels strange at first. Principle 3. Titrated exposure to stillness. If your nervous system has been conditioned to treat stillness as a threat, you cannot simply decide to be okay with it overnight. That's not how threat conditioning works. What works is gradual, repeated exposure to stillness in small, controlled doses. This is the same principle used in exposure therapy for anxiety, slowly desensitizing the threat response by proving, repeatedly, that the feared thing does not produce the feared outcome. Start with 5 minutes. No phone. No background noise. No task. Just sit. Notice the discomfort. Don't run from it. Let the discomfort crest, and then notice that it passes. Every time you sit with stillness and survive it, your nervous system updates its prediction. Stillness, attempted. No catastrophe, safe. The amygdala learns through experience, not through reasoning. You cannot think your way out of this. You have to sit your way out of it. Real-life example. Set a 5-minute timer. Sit somewhere quiet. When the urge to check your phone comes, notice it, name it. Don't act on it. That small act of staying is more powerful than it looks. Principle 4. Audit the origin of the rule. This one takes a little more honesty. Ask yourself, where did the rule come from? Not as a blame exercise, as an archaeological one. Whose voice says you're lazy when you stop? Was it a parent who modeled relentless busyness? A school system that equated worth with grades? An early workplace where visibility meant survival? Psychologist Alice Miller wrote extensively about how children internalize the emotional logic of their caregivers, not the stated rules, but the felt rules. If the people around you as a child were only warm when you were performing, you learned that performance is the price of love. That lesson doesn't disappear with adulthood. It goes underground. Understanding the origin doesn't erase the pattern, but it moves it from the category of truth into the category of history. And history can be revised. Real-life example. Next time the guilt arrives, ask, how old does this feeling feel? Often, rest guilt has the emotional texture of childhood, of being caught doing something wrong. Recognizing that age gap is itself a form of release. Principle 5. Practice identity-stable rest. Remember the spinning top? The goal is not to eliminate the wobble. The goal is to build an identity stable enough that it doesn't need constant motion to stay upright. This means deliberately building self-concept anchors that are not tied to output, values, relationships, ways of being, not just doing. Acceptance and commitment therapy, developed by Stephen Hayes, distinguishes between doing self and observing self. The doing self is defined by what it produces. The observing self is the awareness that watches, steady, present, not dependent on performance to exist. Resting from this place feels different. Not like stopping, like being. This is not a one-time insight, it's a practice. Each time you rest without filling the silence, you are training the observing self. Each time you stay with the discomfort of doing nothing, you are proving to your nervous system that you exist even when you're still. Real-life example. During rest, instead of asking, what should I be doing? Ask, who am I when I'm not doing anything? Sit with that question. You don't need an answer. The asking is the practice. Let's bring it back to one image. The snow globe. When life is full, tasks, obligations, noise, everything is in motion. The shaking feels like living. When you stop, the snow settles, and what's at the bottom is simply you. Not your productivity, not your output, not your usefulness to anyone. Just you. The guilt you feel in that moment is not telling you that you've done something wrong. It's telling you that you've never been fully safe just being yourself, without the spinning, without the motion. Without proving anything. That's the real wound underneath rest guilt. Not laziness, not failure. The deeper belief that stillness makes you vulnerable. That without constant output you might be found to be not enough. And so the work is not learning to rest. The work is learning that you are enough even when you're still. That your worth is not a performance. That love, real love from others and from yourself does not require a receipt. You don't have to fix this today. You don't have to be someone who rests easily, immediately, without conflict. That's not how brains change. Brains change slowly, through repetition, through small, consistent acts of choosing differently. What you can do today is this. The next time you feel the guilt arrive, that specific, familiar wrongness of being still, pause before you reach for something to do. Just pause. Not forever. Just long enough to say inside yourself, I see you. I know where you came from. And I'm choosing to stay still anyway. That pause is not small. That pause is the beginning of a different relationship with yourself. Because here's what I want to leave you with. Rest is not the reward you get after you've earned enough. Rest is not the break between the real parts of your life. Rest is part of how you become who you are. It is where your mind integrates what it's experienced, where your body repairs what's been used, where your sense of self deepens past the surface of what you've done. You are not a machine with a productivity quota. You are a human being. And human beings were not designed to run without stopping. They were designed to move and rest and move again. The guilt is old. You are allowed to be newer than it.